What if I told you that America's most racist man was secretly black? That's right. Many of you may know J. Edgar Hoover as the man who led the FBI for over 48 years, using his power and control to systematically dismantle every Black Power movement that sprung up in America. At every turn, when Black Americans would try and gain freedom or fight against the gross injustices keeping them down, J. Edgar Hoover didn't just run the FBI, he used it as a weapon. And his target of choice was Black America. When Marcus Garvey tried to empower Black communities, Hoover destroyed him. When Martin Luther King Jr. fought for civil rights, Hoover tried to convince him to take his own life. When Fred Hampton united people against poverty, Hoover had him dispatched. But here's where things get interesting. See, most people think they understand Hoover's actions. They think it was just a case of discrimination or power and control. They're wrong, because there's something about Hoover that nobody's talking about. You see, in 1895, every birth had to be registered. Every single one. But Hoover's birth certificate mysteriously didn't exist until 1938, when he was already running the FBI. Things get even stranger. Records disappeared, documents were altered, and anyone who looked too closely at Hoover's family history, they quickly learned to stop asking questions. Because America's most powerful enemy of Black advancement was hiding something so explosive, it would have destroyed everything he built. The man who terrorized Black America for 50 years might have been Black himself. And after watching this video, you'll never look at American history the same way again. By the way, if you enjoy the content we make and want to help spread the message, leave a like and subscribe to our channel. It helps us continue to spread the real Black history that's been left out of the textbooks. In 1950, a 10-year-old girl named Millie McGee ran home from school to ask her grandfather a question about J. Edgar Hoover. His response would haunt her for decades. According to the grandfather, this powerful man was his second cousin and was just passing for white. He also warned her, "Look, daughter, you cannot tell anyone, or else our whole family will be burned as we sleep." And the grandfather wasn't threatening her at all. Their family had already lost two people who'd pressed Hoover to acknowledge his true identity. Hoover's alleged biological father, Uncle Ivy, passed away under mysterious circumstances. A half-sister, just 31 years old with 5 kids, was terminated, dispatched. Both deaths had no death certificates. No investigations. But here's where it gets interesting. The land McGee's family lived on was owned by the Hoover family, the same Hoovers that J. Edgar claimed as his ancestors. When McGee grew up, she didn't just accept the family story. She dug deeper. She brought in licensed genealogists. They went through court records, conducted oral interviews with both Black and white Hoovers, and what they found was shocking. Government employees who checked Hoover's official records found dates had been changed, information had been erased, and filing records had been tampered with. His birth certificate existed when he was already 43 years old and running the FBI. Meanwhile, his siblings' birth certificates were all properly filed and intact. But that was just the beginning. You see, in Washington, D.C., where Hoover grew up, this wasn't just some wild conspiracy theory. Writer Gore Vidal, who grew up in D.C.'s elite circles during the 1930s, said something fascinating. "It was always said in my family and around the city that Hoover was mulatto, mixed race, and that he came from a family that passed." The most powerful circles in Washington openly discussed his background. By the 1990s, this wasn't just whispers anymore. Author Anthony Summers found that in Black communities across the East Coast, Hoover was even referred to as a soul brother. But McGee's research went even further. With the help of top genealogist George A. from Salt Lake City, a man known for tracing some of America's most complex family histories, McGee revealed a dark and disturbing discovery. It started with a 15-year-old African girl, kidnapped and brought to America and sold to a plantation owner named Felix Allen. Allen didn't just buy her. He gave her the name of Sarah and forced himself on her. And that's when they had a baby daughter named Elizabeth. When that baby grew up, Allen forced himself on her too. And it gets worse. Allen let another plantation owner named William Hoover force himself on Elizabeth as well. When she got pregnant, Hoover bought her and their son moved them to DC, and forced her to pass as white. Every detail of this horrific story had been passed down through generations of McGee's family. And now, for the first time ever, the paper trail proved it was all true. But uncovering Hoover's family tree wasn't just about exposing a hidden past. It was about understanding why America's most powerful man spent his entire life destroying his own people. To truly grasp the depth of this destruction, we need to go back to where it all began. It's 1919. Hoover had just been handed control of the Bureau of Investigation's new General Intelligence Division. While most 24-year-olds were trying to find their place in the world, J. Edgar Hoover already knew exactly what he wanted to do with his power, and he had his sights set on one man, Marcus Garvey. Now you need to understand something about 1919 America. Black communities were rising up, fighting back against decades of oppression, and at the center of this renaissance stood Marcus Garvey and his United Negro Improvement Association. Picture this: hundreds of thousands of members, businesses across 40 countries, the largest Black-owned business enterprise in American history. And Garvey's crown jewel was the Black Star Line, 3 massive commercial ships, complete economic independence, a fleet that would connect Black businesses across the globe. For the first time, Black Americans could see a future where they controlled their own destiny, but Hoover labeled it a threat to national security. Within months, he deployed every weapon in the Bureau's arsenal. Surveillance teams tracked Garvey's every move. Informants infiltrated the UNIA's highest ranks. Agents harassed investors until they pulled their money out. But physical surveillance was just the beginning. According to historian Theodore Kornweibel, Bureau agents went straight for the Black Star Line's jugular. They contaminated fuel supplies, sabotaged engines, destroyed the ships from the inside out. The message was crystal clear. Hoover would do anything in his power to destroy the livelihood of Black Americans. By 1923, the Bureau had won, the Black Star Line going bankrupt and the UNIA becoming crippled. And the man at the center of it all, Marcus Garvey, was deported to Jamaica. And with this, Hoover had just written the playbook he would use for the next 50 years. Find the leaders, destroy their reputation, cripple their organizations, and eliminate their power base. And he was just getting started. By the 1950s, Hoover had spent 3 decades perfecting his craft. And his new target? Some upstart by the name of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The surveillance operation against King would become one of the most extensive in FBI history. For the last 5 years of King's life, nothing was private. Every hotel room contained hidden microphones. Every phone line had a tap. Every inner circle harbored FBI informants. Even King's closest advisors were under constant watch. The scale was unprecedented. Agents worked around the clock, transcribing conversations, documenting meetings, building files that grew thicker by the day. When King traveled, FBI field offices in each city received detailed instructions. Monitor his movements, record his speeches, report every interaction. This was how obsessed Hoover was in destroying the civil rights movement. But it reached a turning point in 1964 that shocked even veteran FBI agents. King had just been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, international recognition that made him more influential than ever. Hoover's response revealed just how personal this crusade had become. Under his direction, the FBI crafted an anonymous letter to King. The package included not just a letter, but recordings of King's private conversations and a collection of his alleged indiscretions. Material gathered through years of surveillance and wiretapping. The letter's message started with praise for the older leaders in the civil rights movement like Roy Wilkins, implying King should step aside. But then it took a sinister turn, stating ominously, "There is only one thing left for you to do." King and his advisors understood the meaning immediately. This wasn't just blackmail. It was an invitation for King to take his own life, delivered right as he was about to accept the Nobel Peace Prize. And in case the implication wasn't clear enough, the FBI made sure to send copies of their surveillance materials to King's wife. This wasn't some rogue agent's idea. This came directly from the top. Hoover himself had grown increasingly frustrated with King's growing influence. But Hoover's surveillance expanded beyond King. Other civil rights organizations ended up finding themselves in Hoover's crosshairs. Groups like the NAACP, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and any organization that challenged racial segregation became targets for FBI surveillance. In public, Hoover framed this as a matter of national security. Behind closed doors, he was verbally attacking interracial marriage and praising the White Citizens Council, the respectable face of segregation. When the civil rights movement gained momentum, Hoover responded by launching a secret counterintelligence program that would change American history forever. The tactics he had tested on Marcus Garvey decades earlier, they were about to be unleashed on a scale nobody could have imagined. And this time, Hoover wouldn't just destroy reputations, he would destroy lives. 1956 marked a turning point in Hoover's war against Black America. The Supreme Court had become a problem, consistently limiting the Justice Department's power to prosecute people for their political beliefs. Hoover needed something new, something that operated completely outside the bounds of law. He called it Cointelpro. The program unleashed everything Hoover had learned over 3 decades of surveillance and sabotage. FBI agents didn't just watch their targets anymore. They actively worked to destroy them. They broke into homes and offices in the dead of night. They planted forged documents designed to create conflict. They turned organizations against each other through carefully crafted lies. The official language was chilling. Expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize any Black movement Hoover deemed a threat. Fred Hampton's story reveals exactly what being neutralized meant. Hampton was everything Hoover feared, a 21-year-old leader in Chicago who had achieved the impossible. He'd united the Black Panthers, Young Patriots, and Young Lords under something called the Rainbow Coalition. Poor communities of all races working together against poverty. Hoover wouldn't let that stand. The FBI found their weapon in William O'Neill, a young man facing felony charges for interstate car theft and impersonating a federal officer. The deal was simple: infiltrate the Panthers and his charges would vanish. He'd even get a monthly stipend. O'Neill didn't just infiltrate, he rose through the ranks, becoming director of chapter security and Hampton's personal bodyguard. He drew detailed maps of Hampton's apartment, every room, every piece of furniture, every escape route. On December 3, 1969, O'Neill joined Hampton and other Panthers for dinner. While everyone ate, he slipped secobarbital, a powerful barbiturate, into Hampton's drink. By 1 a.m., Hampton was so drugged he fell asleep mid-sentence while talking to his mother on the phone. At 4:45 a.m., 14 heavily armed police officers struck. Mark Clark, sitting guard with a shotgun, was neutralized instantly. His gun fired once into the ceiling. A reflexive convulsion. It would be the Panthers' only shot. The police moved through the apartment methodically, firing over 99 shots. They found Hampton in his bedroom, unconscious next to his pregnant girlfriend. The officers dragged her out. Then came the execution. According to fellow Black Panther Harold Bell, he heard the officers in Hampton's room.
"That's Fred Hampton. Is he dead? Bring him out. He's barely alive. He'll make it."
2 distinct shots echoed through the apartment. According to Deborah Johnson, Hampton's pregnant girlfriend, who was in bed with him when police dragged her out, an officer then said matter-of-factly,
"He's good as dead now."
The raiding team then turned their weapons on the remaining Panthers sleeping in the north bedroom, all teenagers and young adults. Ronald Satchel, 18. Blair Anderson, 18. Verlena Brewer, 17. And Brenda Harris, 19. They were all seriously wounded, then punished and dragged into the street. But Cointelpro wasn't just about violence. The FBI attacked any program that might make Black organizations look good in their communities. When the Black Panthers started a free breakfast program for children, Hoover ordered it destroyed. When they opened medical clinics in poor neighborhoods, those became targets too. The truth about Cointelpro might have stayed buried forever if not for a group of 8 activists in 1971. They broke into an FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, and what they discovered shook the nation to its core. Thousands of files, detailed operations, internal memos. The entire shadowy machinery of Cointelpro laid bare. The documents revealed Hoover's true obsession, preventing the rise of what he called a Black Messiah, any leader who could unite Black communities. The Bureau wasn't just watching, They were actively working to stop black groups from collaborating. Even the Panthers' free breakfast program for poor children was targeted because it made them look too good in their communities. The revelation sparked the largest investigation of intelligence agencies in American history. Senator Frank Church led a Senate committee that spent months digging through evidence. The findings were devastating. Cointelpro had systematically violated citizens' constitutional rights against unreasonable search and seizure. The FBI had imposed what amounted to an extrajudicial punishment program on American citizens. But by then, the damage was staggering. Leaders neutralized, organizations destroyed, communities torn apart, and a deep distrust between Black America and law enforcement that would last for generations. With Hoover's decades-long campaign against Black advancement laid bare, a profound question emerges. Why? What could drive such a relentless crusade? The answer may lie in understanding the psychological burden of passing, one of America's darkest open secrets. Because to understand Hoover's actions, we need to understand something called passing. See, in the early 1900s, if you were Black but could pass as white, you had two choices: accept life as a second-class citizen, or cross what they called the color line. And once you crossed that line, there was no going back. Because passing wasn't just about looking white, it was psychological warfare against yourself. Imagine living every single day knowing that one slip-up, one wrong word, one person from your past showing up at the wrong moment, and your entire life would implode. The pressure was unimaginable. In Hoover's case, the evidence suggests it shaped everything he did. It motivated him to build walls so high that no one would ever question who he really was. And for someone like Hoover, with all that power at his fingertips, those walls became weapons. Because suddenly, Hoover's obsession with destroying Black leaders makes a twisted kind of sense. What better way to bury your past than by becoming America's greatest defender of white supremacy? This wasn't just discrimination, it was personal. Because for J. Edgar Hoover, every successful Black person wasn't just a threat to white America, they were a threat to his carefully constructed lie. Every civil rights victory brought the spotlight closer to people like him. People with hidden histories, buried birth certificates, and family trees they desperately wanted to forget. And when you understand this, when you really think about the psychological torture of living this double life, suddenly, every decision Hoover made takes on a whole new meaning. In his mind, he was fighting his own reflection. He was in survival mode, and he would burn down anyone who threatened to make America look too closely in the mirror. Living a double life while orchestrating America's most powerful intelligence agency created unique challenges. For Hoover, information became both weapon and shield. His collection of other secrets served a dual purpose: maintaining power and protecting his own carefully constructed identity. For 48 years, he transformed the FBI into something unprecedented, a massive spying machine that gathered dirt on everyone. Presidents, he had files on them. Politicians, he had files on them too. Civil rights leaders, he had files on all of them. And these weren't just ordinary files. We're talking about the most intimate details of people's lives, their affairs, their secrets, their shame. By the time he was done, Hoover had so much power that even presidents were afraid to fire him. Harry Truman was the first to see the danger. He saw the Bureau digging into Americans' private lives. They were setting up illegal wiretaps. They were building files on anyone Hoover deemed suspicious. Truman saw exactly where this was heading. He saw how Hoover was dabbling in sex life scandals and plain blackmail, but he couldn't stop it. John F. Kennedy knew exactly what Hoover was capable of. During his presidency, Hoover would casually drop by to share rumors about Martin Luther King Jr.'s private affairs, trying to poison Kennedy against the civil rights movement. But even JFK had to play along. Lyndon Johnson, he was so wary of Hoover's power that he did something unprecedented. He waived the mandatory retirement age for Hoover, letting him stay FBI director for an indefinite period of time. Better to keep your enemies close. In 1971, Richard Nixon summed it up perfectly in a private recording. He couldn't fire Hoover because he was terrified of the repercussions. That's the President of the United States, afraid of his own FBI director. But Hoover's personal life was kept tighter than Fort Knox. But there was one relationship he couldn't quite hide: Clyde Tolson. For 40 years, Tolson was Hoover's shadow, his second in command, his constant companion. They ate lunch together every single day. They vacationed together. They even had their offices next door to each other. In fact, when Hoover died, he left everything to Tolson: his estate, his home, everything. Tolson even accepted the flag that draped Hoover's casket, and now he's buried just a few yards away from Hoover in Congressional Cemetery. But in Hoover's America, this kind of relationship between two men was more than just scandalous. It was career-ending. So what did Hoover do? He turned his fear of exposure into a weapon. Under his leadership, the FBI began hunting down gay government employees. They called it the Lavender Scare. Dozens lost their jobs. Lives were destroyed. Careers were ruined. All while Hoover and Tolson lived their carefully managed double life. But someone else knew their secret. Meyer Lansky, one of the most powerful mob bosses in America, reportedly had compromising photos of Hoover and Tolson. Specifically, that Hoover was wearing women's clothes, implying he was a cross-dresser. And suddenly, the FBI's strange blindness to organized crime made perfect sense. For decades, Hoover denied the mafia even existed. The man who built an empire collecting other people's secrets had become a prisoner of his own. This was just a taste of the true power of J. Edgar Hoover. Not just the secrets he collected, but the lengths he went through to protect his own were darker than anyone could ever imagine. The story of J. Edgar Hoover forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, identity, and the weight of secrets. Here was a man who might have been born into one of America's oldest stories, a family tree-rooted tragedy. A man who, if the evidence is true, spent his entire life running from his own reflection. The psychological cost must have been staggering. Every morning, he walked into an FBI building filled with white agents because he had explicitly banned hiring black agents. Every day, he worked to destroy any chance of black advancement in America. And every night, he went home to a life so carefully controlled that even presidents were afraid to look too closely. But this isn't ancient history. The machinery Hoover built didn't disappear with him. The tactics he perfected, surveillance, infiltration, disruption, became part of America's DNA. The distrust he sowed between law enforcement and black communities still shapes our world today. And perhaps most tragically, his own story, if the genealogists and researchers are right, reveals the bitter fruit of America's racial divisions. A man who could have changed everything instead chose to preserve a system built on lies. In the end, J. Edgar Hoover's greatest victory might have been his most personal one. He kept his secret. But the cost of that secret? America is still paying for it today. If you want to learn more about black leaders and their struggle against Hoover and his evil plans, check out our video on Marcus Garvey, the black leader too dangerous for America. This was Black Stories Untold, and as always, thanks for watching.